Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, if you're not satisfied with your love or sex life, I want you to know that I get how painful it is. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do to change things up and get the results you want. But having spent 20 years as a dating and relationship coach, supporting thousands of men to have the relationships and sex they want, I know it's possible for you when you get the right kind of support. As a woman coach, I bring a unique advantage by helping you understand how women think and feel and why they say and do things that can be so frustrating for you. My specialty is being able to tell within minutes why you're losing attraction, trust, or respect from women, and how to turn that around. Even though you've likely been raised to think you should be a man who doesn't need any help, it just doesn't work that way because none of us were handed a guide to love or sex. So every month by application, I open my calendar to a few men for consultations. Men are amazed to walk away from these sessions feeling more confident in and out of the bedroom. Coaching isn't for everyone. I work with men who are willing to be honest about their role in the situations they've created. So if you're still playing the blame game, this isn't for you. But if you're ready to take action and have a love and sex life you feel great about, book a time to meet with me. Go to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/consult and fill out the form to tell me more about you so we can set something up. That's ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/consult. Enjoy today's podcast. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to be here today with my guest, Tim Corcoran. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, Shayna. Great to be here.
We are going to talk today about soul purpose and how soul purpose is actually tied into the wilderness and nature and wildness. And, you know, it is a pretty common thing for, I think, people of any gender, but, you know, men especially. I was just working with a client 5 minutes ago where he was saying, you know, I sacrificed a lot. I sacrificed my passion. I sacrificed some of my soul because I wanted to be committed to my family. You know, I was raising my family and I had to have a stable job. And so to me, you know, what I've seen is that this is a pretty common experience. And what I love about what you're doing is that you are helping men and people, right, get back in touch with why am I here on this planet? What is all this about? You know, what are those deep places in myself that I maybe haven't touched in a while that actually are the source of connection, fulfillment, all of that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let me give a quick bio for you and then we'll dive in.
Okay.
Tim Corcoran is the founder of Purpose Mountain, where he offers nature-based purpose guidance to support people with a love for wild nature who feel a deep yearning and a burning desire to discover their soul purpose. He's a leader of Men's Group, Holistic Rites of Passage for Boys and Men, and Wilderness Vision Quests. Healing the cultural rift between the mainstream and indigenous cultures, transformational conscious work, the spiritual journey, ancestral work, deep nature connection, family, and health are all deep commitments in Tim's life. He is a heart-centered father of 2 brilliant boys and a husband to a magnificent wife and lives in the pristine Sandpoint, Idaho, USA. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And this topic definitely touches my heart and soul. And so I'm excited to talk about it. And I'm curious to start, right? When you talk about soul purpose, how do you define that, or what actually is that to you?
Sure. Well, that's a great and an important question because I think it's easy to assume what we mean when we say that word, but it really means different things to different people. And I've come to understand that there's a lot of layers to it. So on the most simple level, soul purpose is the deepest reason for why we are here, why an individual is here, or why a family is here, or why a group is here. And I think so many people would equate purpose with action-oriented tasks in the world. Like, what am I supposed to do? Especially us guys, very easy to go there. And I certainly do that all the time. Yeah. But equally, if not more importantly, Shayna, our soul purpose is also about who am I being in this moment? what qualities am I embodying? So, yes, on the one hand, an individual's purpose is all about the actions they take and maybe a visionary organization or deep transformational work that they might do
Yeah.
in the world. And it's also equally about, God, how do I show up when I'm in the grocery store with the checkout clerk, right?
Yes.
I think if we're really going to tap into our purpose, then we need to look holistically at the fullness of our lives
Mm.
and ask, how is it expressing itself in each and every moment?
I love this. So it's not just, okay, my sole purpose is to do a specific thing or have a specific career, have a specific social impact.
Mm-hmm.
It actually can be broken down more, or not broken down necessarily, but experienced moment to
Yes.
moment.
Yeah. Kind of like looking at different facets on a diamond. I actually break it down. We may or may not get into all these details here in this podcast. I break it down into 8 or 9 different aspects, and about half of them are action doing oriented, and the other half are being oriented, because all of that is needed in our world today, certainly. Yeah.
Right. And I think there is a trap of, for men especially, okay, if I do the right thing, I will succeed, and then I will get the things I was promised.
Oh, yeah.
And then turning and looking at people in their lives, and right, the connection's missing, or the vitality's missing, the joy is missing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the classic thing we see was what I did a summit last winter, the Men's Midlife Revolution. Well, I interviewed you. You were part of that. Yeah. And the classic thing we see is a man in midlife. He's in his 40s, and he's married. He's got a couple kids, and he's got the career and the whole bit. And yet, as you're saying, there's this deep emptiness inside of what am I really doing? And especially as we look ahead, I love the old exercise. It's a common one amongst folks like you and I, but the old exercise of the deathbed, right?
I love that one.
Imagining, looking all the way out. Okay, God, 100 years old, looking back, laying in my deathbed, looking back. How am I going to feel about how I showed up in this life? And was it all about me or just my little circle, or did I make a greater contribution? How did I leave this world? Did I leave it better than I found it? Was I just focused on humans? Did I actually focus or even notice the earth itself and all this stuff? Right. So, yeah.
God, and it's become a lot more real, right? With COVID, with nature blowing up. And actually I just found out that one of my high school boyfriends just passed away from a heart attack, 44 years old.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So it's, right. We could look out from 100, we could look out from next year and realize we don't even know. Right. So I can feel some of that urgency, crawling back in to what you're doing here.
Well, and I'm really glad you mentioned that. So we do live in very much unprecedented times, right? I mean, my God. Look at the wildfires burning in California. Look at the pandemic. Look at the economic recession. Look at the political upheaval. I mean, it's just insane, right?
Yeah.
And so, there, from a mythological perspective, though, we could say that all of this external chaos and everything that's stirring, it tends, it can be a calling for those of us who are connected and conscious from within. How am I showing up in these times, and what's really needed? What's my greatest contribution? And I've certainly found that. I don't know if you have, but the more people are present, I think, to the calling and the transformational process that individuals who are willing to take the journey within, the transformational processes are clearly amplified over the last 6 months in all the work that I've done. So it's a really exciting time, and there's a lot on the line. I mean, I don't think anyone could deny that right now.
No, and I agree, right? For those listening, right? The call is now. There is that sense of, all right, especially like I can't really go out that much, so where else am I going to go? But there's a forced reflection. Yeah. So as you help people discover soul purpose, right? I mean, in the way you're talking about it is somewhat different from some of the ways I've thought about it or heard about it. So, because you're bringing it into each moment, or these qualities, right? How do you help people tap into what their soul purpose might be?
Yeah. So, well, that's a big question, and we could go. I mean, I could talk about that for a long, long time. But in short, and it's important for me to acknowledge, I have a big background in nature connection and as
Yeah.
a wilderness guide. My wife and I started a wilderness school that we're still running today. We started that 15 years ago. A big part of my calling, my purpose, Shana, is to connect, as you read in my bio, connect with some of the indigenous teachers and the indigenous wisdom that's still present and still here, and help bring that to the modern world, right? And help bridge that gap. And so I'm a firm believer in the power of connecting deeply with nature as probably one of the most powerful contexts for an individual to connect with their soul.
Yeah.
And, if we look at that for a moment, that's another question there, right? How to define soul? Well, we might say that's a tricky one, and that can almost be a bit paradoxical, but loosely speaking, we could say that soul is our deepest essence, right? It's the place where we find ourselves interconnected with all things.
Yes.
I look at soul and purpose actually more as an ecological function than a spiritual function. I know most people would look at it and say, oh, that's a spiritual thing. I would actually look at it as an ecological thing. What I mean by that is we're each uniquely designed by our nature and by how we've been nurtured, with a certain set of unique gifts. And just like if we looked to the natural world and asked, how does a tree or how does an animal fit in? What's their unique ecological niche?
Yeah.
Each of us as human beings uniquely has a unique niche in the world. And so the journey of discovering purpose is not so much about, what I want from an ego place. It's much more about what is naturally emerging and has been emerging all along.
Yes.
What do I need to surrender to? A lot of people, of course, ask that question just as you did, so how do you find your purpose? Well, again, from a mythological perspective, we could say that soul and purpose is seeking us. As
Are we actually listening? Are we actually paying attention?
Yeah, as we're seeking it. So maybe the question is not how do I find it as much as it is how do I allow myself to be found?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, that's a good one. And so then the question becomes about, okay, well, if we're holding soul as this sacred, mysterious power of how we're interrelated with all things, then it's not about forcing it. We know that's not going to work. It's about a journey of surrender. And so there are some best practices. Yeah. That's a big one, right?
I want to come back to surrender, especially with an audience.
Let's go there now. Let's go there now. Yeah.
Great. So, with an audience of men, whenever I bring up the topic of surrender, there tends to be a sense of like, that's not necessarily for me, or that's a feminine quality, or, some sense of, I don't know if I want to go there. So can you say what you mean by surrender?
Well, sure. In the context of purpose discovery and recognizing our gifts, recognizing our values.
Yeah.
I guess what I mean by that is what ties in with vulnerability, right? And I think I can't imagine talking about surrender without talking about vulnerability. So there's that. And
another favorite topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what does that mean? So the journey of surrendering to soul is, well, again, going into the natural world helps, because when we do that, we slow down. It's about slowing down. It's about letting go of agenda.
Right.
It's about recognizing what have my gifts been all along. There's a kind of a retrospective way to look to access it. And then as well, there's the deeper, as I said, mythological approach where we tie into our dreams and images and, what some people call woo-woo. But the surrender part is about, okay, there's something I was born to do. And, at its essence, when a person connects with their purpose, Shana, I would always like to say this, it's terrifying and irresistible,
exhilarating,
all at the same time,
all at the same time.
Because it's like, oh my God, I feel so fully alive doing this work, and yet it scares the crap out of me, and I've got to let go of my stories that keep me small and keep me safe, and take a risk and put myself out there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's surrendering, I think, to that journey. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
answering the question fully,
No,
but
it's
yeah.
great. It's great. And, I just think about how at times people can sometimes think of surrender as weak, right? Or this thing of like, well, then I'm giving up or I'm giving
Right.
over. And yet, I think that comes often from a perspective, and maybe we don't need to go too far down this rabbit hole, but
Right.
that our mind or our intellect is actually in control.
Right.
And when I hear you talk about soul purpose, right, it reminds me of the experiences I have, and I tend to go toward these as much as possible, where it's not me necessarily trying to control the world, or the experiences or myself, but actually um, being able to be more present, to pay attention to what's happening, to be, more in the moment with people and situations. And there's
Yes.
there's a magical experience that starts to happen that we miss. It can
Yes.
be more subtle until we stop like doing, going, pushing, forcing.
Exactly. And that whole approach of I've got to be in control, I've got to push it, I got to force it. I mean, let's just look at it honestly and say, well, where has that gotten us? For the listeners, how has that worked out in your life? I know for me,
Yeah.
when I walk down that path, it doesn't go too well.
Mm,
Just ask my wife, right?
right.
No way, and we can look at that on the individual level.
Yeah.
Shannon, we can look at it on the collective. I mean, look at our world today. I think so much of the issues we do face is a direct result of that approach,
Yes.
right? And
Right.
so,
Pushing, forcing, like how much can we get and how much can we
right,
mine and how far can we go and all the technological advances. And now, right,
here we are.
here we are.
Here we are. Yeah. So to open ourselves to our vulnerability, to surrender, to take that journey, is to say yes to the fullness of life.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole other side for the guys out there I'm thinking of, who have not maybe yet made that
Yeah.
jump. There's a whole other experience. And that's where the great fulfillment, that's where great meaning, that's where, oh my God, I'm in alignment with my gifts. I'm sharing my gifts,
Yes.
and I know I'm doing what I was put on this earth to do.
Yeah.
That's where that deep satisfaction comes from.
Yes. I know I'm put on this earth to do what I was meant to do, and how unique it is for each person. And it's
Yes.
going back to the deathbed exercise, right? Where,
Yeah.
right, it creates this stark reality of, okay, instead of I'm just going along, getting a paycheck or trying to put food on the table, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we may have more lives than this one, but this is the only one we're aware of in this body, in this, this specific way.
Yes. And this one
So,
counts.
and this one counts, right? And we
Yeah.
don't know when it's going to be over. So, how do I want to actually have lived this life? What do I want to contribute? Like you said, so
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What do I want to say? There's something in here. It's like, what got you so passionate about this?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I've always had a great love for nature my whole life, and I've always been a very sensitive person, a sensitive guy my whole life. Growing up, I'm 46, so growing up in the 80s, being a sensitive boy, I didn't exactly perceive that as a gift,
Yeah.
right? When I was a
Yeah.
kid, no fun to be the sensitive boy in the locker room, right? The whole thing.
Yeah.
And I did. I mean, I had a great childhood. I had a great loving family and a lot of blessings, but I had my share of trauma as well,
Mm-hmm.
and some of that included being bullied and my parents getting divorced. And all alongside that was this I think natural questioning mind that I have, very curious mind of just like contemplating the mysteries of life, like why am I here?
Why are we here?
What does all this mean? What does it matter? Is it random? Does it mean something?
Yeah.
And um, I had some early moments where I grew up in the Midwest in Indiana, and I remember my dad taking us on a big trip out west when I was little, and seeing the Rocky Mountains for the first time, seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, going to the Badlands of South Dakota, and there was something that the landscape itself did to me, that of the West in particular, that
Mm-hmm.
it activated or changed or evoked something in me. Shane, I still find that mysterious, but it somehow spoke to my soul and
Yeah.
activated something. And so fast forward to the college years, I'd played by the rules and always did good in school. Well, wound up with a history professor in my latter years
Mm.
who was teaching an advanced history course, but it was really an introduction to shamanism in
Ooh,
disguise at a
beautiful.
conservative Midwest university, and it really, really brought me alive. And it reminded me of those early experiences in the Western landscapes. And as well, I had a deep, from the unfortunate, trauma that I experienced as a
Mm-hmm.
boy. A big part of me, I think, was in the process of turning my back on the modern world at that point, saying, what the hell, like I played by the rules. I did what I was
Where did it
supposed to
get
do.
me?
And my family blew up. It sent
Yeah.
a chasm down into my soul. And I kind of got fucked over by it.
Yeah.
Excuse the language. But yeah. And so I said, there's this American dream is a pipe dream. Like there's gotta be something else. And I intuitively knew somehow and felt called to the First Nations people, the Native
Mm-hmm.
American people.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, after college, I went out and moved in, plopped myself down on the Navajo Indian Reservation for a couple years.
Wow.
Was working to find my way there. Very different experience, especially being a privileged white male.
Yes.
Suddenly being the minority, that was really different.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it took me a while, but I fell in love during that time with the love of my life, my wife now, Janine. But long story short, we eventually found a school that was starting, that was based on these old skills of wilderness survival and
Mm-hmm.
animal tracking and wild edible medicinal plants, all this really cool direct nature connection stuff that just set me on fire. And there was the spiritual earth-based connection. So
Well, it's
the
such an example of purpose, right? Like it set you on
yes,
fire. There was this
yes, exactly,
aliveness in you.
yeah, I felt all of that. So but getting involved with the sweat lodge ceremony, and then ultimately a vision quest, which is a traditional ceremony of fasting and praying for 4 days and 4 nights alone out on the land, kind of the ultimate nature-based purpose discovery,
Yes. Yes.
technology, if you will. And all that really brought me alive. And I had some deep psycho-spiritual moments. I activated my dream life. As you're noticing, all my passion got activated, and I really saw, yeah, this is the path for me. And so I've been doing that ever since. 20 years now. We apprenticed for 5 years, had an opportunity to work with a handful of traditional Native American elders, which was an incredible
Oh, that
blessing.
must have been amazing.
Yeah, totally. And then we started our own wilderness school. That was 2005. And then about 5 years ago, I started my second business, as if the wilderness school wasn't enough.
Right.
But that's Purpose Mountain.
But right, I was going to say another purpose, right? The
Yes.
purpose that also came through that, working with men and helping them reconnect to their purposes, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And I do work with women as well, although I love working with guys. Yeah. So that's a short story. Lots of details I left out there, but yeah.
Well, I love though, it seems like you, again, going back to what you said before, it's like you allowed yourself to be found in some way, or maybe, it happened at such a young age. But for some men who didn't have that experience when they were young, or they don't remember it, right? It seems like there is a kind of, imagine some of the work you do when you take men out into nature, you clear away some of the muck and the distraction. You can actually get back to those roots.
Yeah, because the reality is, again, soul is always speaking to us.
Yes.
Our deepest essence is always here, but it's not of the mind. It's not of the ego. The ego doesn't know. The mind does not. It's not capable of communicating directly with us. So it's about releasing that. And even meditation is a good practice that can begin to kind of loosen some of those tightly held bonds. But as we loosen our connection to the ego and allow ourselves to be found by soul, it speaks, and synchronicities start happening, and we find moments of being fully alive and connecting in with our curiosity that leads to our passion, that leads to the full aliveness.
Yep.
And so it's about following those things. It doesn't always make sense,
No.
And it's not supposed to.
No. I remember myself I remember having started a workshop business for women on love and relationship and all of that, building the courses and everything. And then just being like, but the calling is to work with men, right? Like I couldn't deny that. And men were the ones who were actually showing up and were easily saying yes. And I felt that fire. I felt that light, right? Whereas the women's work, I'm like, it was good. And I want women to have that. With the men's work, it was like, oh God, I can't not do it.
Exactly. And what a great example of, I mean, it sounds like, do I hear you right, Sheena, that there was a part of you, maybe the ego, that wanted it to be working with women?
Yeah, that was my plan.
Yeah. Okay, great. So yeah, that was the big thing to let go of. There's a great example of vulnerability and letting go and surrendering right there.
Right. And where it doesn't always make sense. There's a way where it's like, this is a little odd that I'm a woman doing this in a man's world, or right. But at the same time, every time I check in, I can't really deny that.
Yeah. And then look at you now. I mean, my God, you're so successful and you're so on fire with your own work. And I think that's a clear proof's in the pudding, like here it is, like, yeah, that was your calling. Like clearly you're kicking butt,
Oh, thanks. That's sweet.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about one of the things you mentioned before we started this is the mature masculine. And can you talk a little bit about how does the mature masculine tie in with soul purpose and with your work with nature? Great.
Yeah. So that's a really important question these days, especially for us guys, because I think, again, if we look at so many of the issues in our world, much of that is a result of men being not embodying the mature masculine, but indeed embodying the immature masculine. Yeah. And so by definition, I would offer that for a man in today's world to discover his purpose,
I can feel this.
I don't see how that could possibly happen without some embodiment. Some embodiment of the mature masculine. Yeah, I mean, that's going to happen. So what do we mean when we say mature masculine? Well, I would look at, maybe a basic definition of like, what is masculine emotional maturity? Well, the way I like to define that is I'm aware of my emotions, I'm accepting of my emotions, and I've expressed my emotions in healthy ways that are non-destructive.
Beautiful.
That's like a really simple one. Aware, accepting, and expressive of emotions. Like not stories from the head, but emotions, anger, joy, sadness, shame, fear, actual emotions.
Yes.
And what a basic bit of work that is, and yet it's still so foreign to so many men. And so many men haven't seen that modeled. So many men don't have a support group, don't even have a single friend who models that for them. So how the heck are they supposed to do it? Who amongst us was initiated into that when
there was not that rite of passage.
13, 14, 15, there was no rite of passage. Yeah, that's much of the work I do now is bringing that to boys when they hit 13, 14, 15. My oldest son is 14 now. He's probably just about to go through his in the coming year. So
that's exciting.
Really present for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, the mature masculine. So another way to look at that is, well, classically, what have been the options kind of for us guys? It's like, well, either I'm the macho, machismo, all
jerk,
of that.
Right. Like that kind of
right? Yeah. Or what? I'm spineless and I collapse. I got nothing. And so what's the third way? It's like, well, I know my truth. I know who I am. I'm centered in my power. And I use that in service. Yeah. And I recognize that myself as a man, especially for all the white men who I'm imagining there's probably a number of listening, I recognize I'm in a position of privilege, right? And that without doing anything, the deck is kind of stacked in my favor. And not to say that, we don't struggle, but that I do occupy a position of privilege, and it's my responsibility if we're going to bring healing and goodness back to this world, to identify who is in a position that's not of privilege and how can I support them? How can I use my gifts to bring some level of equality and justice to this world? And so those are a few thoughts. Yeah, we could. How else do you want to address this?
It's a powerful tie-in with purpose too, right? That from a mature place, there is a sense of it's not just about me. And not also, many of the guys I work with end up, or start as pleasers or givers. So in some ways it was never about them, but it's still about trying to get one's own needs met, or to be loved, or to be wanted, or to be appreciated, right? Sure. So whichever way we look at it, there's still kind of the immature is still a little bit of a smaller lens or a smaller view, whereas the mature seems to take more into account, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I certainly know the people pleaser and the nice guy syndrome really, really well. That was me for a lot of years. And what's happening when we do that is, I'm disconnected with my vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I need your love or whoever it is I'm talking to or interacting with. And so I'm going to do whatever it takes to please you, to be nice to you. So you'll give me your love, because I don't know how I can get through this life without it.
Yeah.
And the solution, of course, I know you know this, and you probably had a number of guests speak about this, I'm imagining, on your podcast here, but is recognizing that vulnerability and recognizing that I can be accountable to that in myself. I can love myself. I can show up for my vulnerability and take the winds out of the sail of the nice guy and the people pleaser that has to get that from somewhere else, right? From someone else.
Right. Yeah. And then stepping into purpose, right? And rather than just kind of floating along or going day by day, to actually have an intention or a reason for living and being here.
Exactly.
Powerful.
Exactly. Because by definition, a purpose is a purpose beyond self.
Yeah.
Right. A true purpose is not relegated just to the domain of self. It's about serving others. It's about serving the earth. It's about serving future generations. Mm-hmm. And so we have to come to a certain amount of healing in ourselves, release the immature masculine, grow up, right?
Yep.
And step into that mature masculine. That's what's going to allow us to serve in a deeper way. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for this. I know we could talk for days about it.
Oh, yeah.
And what do you want to leave men with? What do you feel like, okay, if you didn't say, you would regret?
That's a great question. Well, importantly, healing and discovery of purpose is entirely possible. And I frankly believe it's the birthright of every human being, certainly for us as men. Yeah. There was a time in my life, Shana, where I would not have believed that, where I thought it was all random and just whatever, floating around, and really low self-esteem, and was on the other side, on the front end of my wounds, and hadn't done the healing work, but was locked into the people pleaser and the immature masculine for sure. And, if when a person is in that state, by definition, you can't see out. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of cliche, but my God, if I could do it, anybody can do it. I mean, I look back at the guy I was when I was 25, 20 years ago. I'm like, oh my God, it was just, I could not have imagined that I would ever be on a podcast, or be facilitating groups or individuals and do all this. So yeah, my message is real change is possible. You do have a purpose. It's in there. Healing is possible. Growth is possible. And my God, the world needs you. The world needs each of us in our purpose to make the difference we're meant to make, and bring healing and a positive vision back to this world.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And where can men find you if they want more? Yeah.
So my work is at Purpose Mountain. So it's just www.purposemountain.com. I've got a free PDF I put together, like 30, 40 page. It's more like a little workbook, for guys can just check that out, and women as well. I work with all genders. But yeah, it's got some great exercises and some reading and a couple of other good stories in there, and some good stuff. So yeah, purposemountain.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.